Okay, thanks, Catherine, for the introduction, and thank you very much for Catherine for organizing this wonderful seminar, so I can have a chance to share some of my views and thoughts of this interesting topic here. Let me try to share the screen first. Here we go. Can you see my screen? Okay, now let's get started. Well, why this topic? This topic is kind of interesting because in economics, actually, we are very well aware of the topic resilience because in economics, we observe for different centuries ups and downs of the economy. Economic cycles occur for centuries. Even in the Bible, we're talking about 7 years of good years and then 7 years of famine. And indeed, the economics of resilience have been studied extensively in the past decades, mainly because we observe ups and downs of the global economy more frequently, first. And second, this occurs rather a kind of transmission process. That means for one major economy, if it observes some sort of ups and downs, the shocks will be transferred or transmitted to other economies as well, causing some emerging markets being hurt badly and causing economic turmoil across the global economy. And indeed, this is by the Academy of Swedish Academy of Sciences, a paper by those scientists, Lee and the others. They published an article in the International Review of Environmental Resources Economics. They look at the topic resilience and economic model theories and very comprehensively. But one major issue of these studies is that they look at the regime shifts. That means they look at a macroeconomic perspective rather than looking at the individual level. In other words, they look at how economies will react to those kind of economic crisis, how the economy will correct itself, what kind of institutional changes, and what kind of remedial measures we have to put in place in order to combat those economic shocks or to drive the economy back to the original shape. In other words, we look at the macro level rather than on the micro level, rather on the individual level. Then we think about the whole process. In very seldom I observe papers in economics, they look at individual level because for economists to conduct surveys, it will be very difficult. But for economists to look at macroeconomic data, there are plenty. We can observe those economic data published by different governments for easy comparisons. So for individual level, there are too much noises. We use the term noise. That means for individual variance, there are too much. But for macroeconomic data, the beauty is that they have been aggregated so that individual influences will be kept at a minimum. But for this important topic, resilience, in particular, human resilience, how to handle this? And actually, a paper by Shue, Robert Shue, he is a Nobel Prize laureate of economic sciences in 2013. He studied what really matters individual alone, or what really individuals really care in economics. That magic word is inflation. So he did an extensive search of the internet and found out that inflation hit around 872,000 hits. And the next economic word being searched will be unemployment. That means people are very observed, are very concerned with inflation, price level changes, and unemployment, whether I can get my job, get my job. But people worry more about inflation than unemployment. Now, and indeed, there is one thing called the painful index created by economists. There is painful index. The index is constructed by adding inflation and unemployment together. So in economics, we always think that inflation and unemployment are the two evils. They are not welcomed by people. But inflation is even worse than unemployment. So that's why in my presentation, I will focus on inflation and how it is related to human resilience. To the general public, what is inflation? Inflation is the decrease of purchasing power. Inflation is the rise of prices. Deflation is the depreciation of money. And indeed, people will just think that inflation is not a good thing. Now, not quite so, because inflation, they do have some positive impact. Because when the price level has a moderate increase, it creates some sort of incentive for the economy to grow. Prices go up as well as wages will go. People will be happier if they see their paychecks got thicker and thicker. This is human nature. So in these days, modern economies say that 2% inflation is a good thing. Anything above 2 will be leading to discontent and some sort of people not happy with that. But how to get to that 2%? Is 2% a really good thing? Or is 2% a really reflect people's desire for any advancement of the economy? Not really, because in the following slides, I'll show you that the 2% indeed is a myth. Well, this is I get from the Investopedia, so that you can look at the coffee prices in the 70s and in the early and in the 2022. So in the early 70s, only a quarter can buy you a cup of coffee, but last year it takes you nearly $2. So inflation goes up. We are not happy about that. That's the normal feeling. But look at the inflation of Hong Kong. This graph traces the past 20 years of inflation in Hong Kong, some ups and downs. And anything below 0 is called deflation. That means the price goes down to a level that creates a negative impact on the economy. But how come the inflation figures in Hong Kong goes up and down so dramatically? And when you look at the volatility of those of this index, you observe one interesting thing. We simply doesn't seem to have any control over it. Or when we look at the price level, we observe some ups and downs, which is outside our control. We cannot do anything. Well, if I put my hat back as a government official, I will feel that I'm not doing my job well, my job done, because as a government official, we should care about the well-being of the society, and any drastic changes in prices will not do good to the economy. That means the government is not doing a good job in this sense. But apparently, we can do very little. Why? The topic for this presentation is institutional constraint. One major institutional constraint we have in Hong Kong is our currency board system, is our monetary base, is our financial system. Why? Because ever since the year 1983, the Hong Kong dollar is paired with the US dollar at the official rate of $1 equal to 7.8 Hong Kong dollar ever since the year 1983. Now, there are some historical issues behind this pattern, because at the time there were some talks about the return of Hong Kong back to the fatherland. So this raises some sort of confidence crisis. So the Hong Kong dollar dropped tremendously in the year 1983. The worst exchange rate is $1 equal to 9.6 Hong Kong dollar. So we have this background. So ever since 1983, Hong Kong dollar was paired with the US dollar. And because of this, fixed exchange rate, although in the official document, we call it the linked exchange rate, but academically, we call it the currency board. Under this fixed exchange rate, the US dollar interest rate and the Hong Kong dollar interest rate must be in par. Otherwise, interest arbitrage, that means people will try to deposit money into the higher interest-bearing asset, will drive the exchange rate back to the 7.8 threshold. And as a result, we always maintain this link rate of 7.8. Now, does that matter? The issue is, unlike other countries, we cannot control our monetary supply. Because of the fixed exchange rate, any interest rate changes in the US will be transmitted to Hong Kong. And any inflow of money will be transferred into the expand of monetary base, driving up prices of Hong Kong. Now, why this matter? Because the first point is interest rate we cannot change. We can only give subsidies to people in periods of high inflation to ease the burden. But we cannot use the economic weapons, that means interest rate, to drive the prices down. Therefore, once the subsidies are given, you cannot take it back. So it creates a very high burden on the government for giving further subsidy or to give further strategic investment in other aspects. Because once you give the subsidy, you'll be there forever. You have a fixed amount of money you have to pay as subsidy. And as an international financial center and open economy, the inflow of money into Hong Kong will drive the prices up and down. And therefore, when we look back to the, to the inflation rate, this is the major reason behind we have no control of inflationary pressure in Hong Kong. We have to just, actually, we can do very little. What can we do is, we're trying to give subsidies away. Say, for example, when inflation is high, people are complaining, the government will suspend the rental of public housing, or to give more subsidy for those who rely on public transport. That's what we can really do. And consequently, what are the consequences? The price level, the volatilities of the price level by default. This is something we have to bear with it. Will be high in Hong Kong. We have to observe ups and downs of the price level in Hong Kong. And the bad thing is, wages are not determined by price level. Wages are determined by productivity, not price. That means even though the price is high, but you are not productive enough, you don't observe a pay increase. So wages are determined by productivity. And for the general public, they will face a very high pressure from living cost increases because they cannot control. And they cannot compare with it, and they have no way out. In simple words, they have no way out. That's why whenever the MTR increases, its price level its fares, whenever the rental index goes up, people will complain because they can do very little for general public. So when we first further look at the consumer price index of Hong Kong, this is the commonly used indicator of price level in Hong Kong. The weights of different components are listed here. One very interesting observation is when we look at the composite CPI of Hong Kong, the heaviest weight go to housing, 40.25%. If you count 100% as inflation, then housing will constitute around over 40%. And within that 40%, public rental housing will be around another 40%. That means the government actually can control, well, I use the word control in quotation marks, the published inflation figures through any movement of government rental housing. That means if the government decided to freeze the public rental housing, the rents of public rental housing, then inflation will go down substantially because of that heavy weight of housing in the composite CPI construction. And within the food, 27.41%, over half of them will be going to takeaways. That means if you dine in a restaurant, that will goes up to the inflation. But you buy foodstuff from the local wet market, the wage is relatively lower. And then when you look downwards, another major component is transportation, 6.47%. Another major way. Now, in these days, the government also gives subsidies for taking public transport. That means this is consistent with what I previously mentioned. The government cannot control inflation through the interest rate policy, but the government can control inflation by giving away subsidies. But does this really good for the economy? Does it really good for human being? That's something I would like to explain a little bit more. For the miscellaneous goods, 3.32%, actually, it includes those cell phones is included. That means with the introduction of new iPhones and the new Samsung cell phones, the inflation figure will also go up. So what are the implications? Rises of prices in some items can be offset by other items, other sectors, leading to moderate change of consumer price index. And indeed, the current CPI figure is around 2%. But when you ask the people on the street, they will complain about high prices because for a man on the street, they will their major spending could be foodstuff, and their perceived inflation will be much higher than actual inflation. It causes people a lot of concern. Now, how to relate it to human resilience? Well, inflation hurts the well-being of humans in terms of economic purchasing power, and how to handle this will require a lot of preparation, a lot of education, and a lot of understanding of how the economy works. In other words, a good financial planning will be very useful and very important to be more resilient. And indeed, Shue. Now, I mentioned Shue again because he's a big name first, and second, he also finds that a very interesting topic, which is rather untouched in the economic literature. There exists a generation gap in view of towards inflation. Because in economics, we always think that human beings are rational. Economic agents, human beings, they should be the same. They should think rationally, they should behave the same, no matter he or she is, no matter the gender, the age. But Shue finds that there's a generation gap towards inflation. And using data from US, Germany, and Brazil, they find that the older generation, the older people, they have very strong views towards inflation. They demand the governments to do more to fight against inflation. But for the younger generation, they don't seem to care too much. So Shue kind of conclude that it can be the case, the younger generation, they don't observe too many economic cycles, they don't understand too much how inflation can be such a horrible thing. So inflation can be a double-edged sword in human resilience and adaptation. If people can manage inflation risks through their career planning, through in their investment planning, and through their retirement planning, and actually they have better resilience in this sense. But for those who cannot mitigate or to combat the inflation risks because they do not have a good career, they do not have a good job, they do not have sufficient investment, they do not have a good retirement planning, they are the ones who are going to suffer. So the implication is that inflation can be a factor affecting human resilience, and financial education on retirement planning is a much needed element in kind of helping the people to be more resilient to be against economic downturns. So we talk about retirement planning, retirement planning, we're talking about financial education, but actually the World Bank has already laid down 5 pillars in retirement planning: public sector, the private sector, personal saving, social support, and family support. And for social support and family support, we can take take them away for the time being, because they are talking about support from other sources. But for the personal savings, that means the people got to have a very good career planning, investment planning, and retirement planning before they can save up enough financial resources for their retirement, so that they can be resilient. So the key point here is whether we have sufficient education for them to understand they have to have a very good career planning, and when they are young, when the people are young, and to have sufficient financial planning when they are young, to have sufficient investment planning when they are young, so they can save up sufficient resources for their retirement. So this is the constraint that I'm thinking, or that I'm aware of the Hong Kong situation right now, because last October was a very dramatic month, because for many people, they got retired in October last year. All of a sudden, they find that the MPF account will hit historical low. They are kind of helpless. So they kind of because they retire, there's not much chance for them to have more resilience when they retire. So my conclusion is, for any topic for resilience, in particular economics, we have to get into career planning, investment planning, and pre-retirement planning. Okay, thank you very, very much. This is my brief introduction and some summary of my views, and questions are most welcome.